and move on from there. This has been kind of tricky, and so we're going to start today on page 59 in the book. Page 59 in the book. And this is going to be the October 17th lesson, and we're not going to read the whole text. 39, I'm sorry. My vision's not very good either. I can see that, though. Page 39 in the book, which is entitled David and Nobel, or Nabal, whichever we say that. And before hey, Keith, come in here. Hey, Joey, you're to read the text today. You want to read the text? I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to read the text that starts with lesson 8. Can you do that? Lesson 8. And just read that text. But we'll do that in just a minute. It's going to be the 23 through 42. Yeah. 23 through 42. That way it won't take so long to read it. We are studying, who are we studying now? David. Is David already king of Israel? No. That's right. Does he become king in either of these two lessons? No, he does not. So who is king? And what happens to Saul? He eventually loses his life, doesn't he? Who was his? Who would have been his son to move to the monarchy? Jonathan. That's right. So these folks were all. We're not going to say closely kin because they're not, but these were all people who were in the hierarchy of Israel. Now, and I'm going to get to our points here in just a second. In what part of Israel did David reign primarily, or where did he spend most of his time in Israel now? In Judah, that's right. Which is what part of Israel? Southern part. That's right. So we're already laying the groundwork for what's going to follow later. When we have Solomon as king, and then when we divide the kingdoms and we go north and south. So, God's raising up King David here eventually to rule over both parts, and then we move on to Solomon, and then we move on to the divided kingdom. Now, what part does David play in the plan of salvation? That's a hard question. I've been thinking about how to ask that. But does David play a role as an ancestor of Christ? He absolutely does. And the plan of salvation would not have come to pass. We would not have Christ come at the first century. We wouldn't have the surrounding group that he had, the apostles and others. The greater than 500 people who saw him raised from the dead all go back to the house of David or to the family of David. Now, I raise all that to say this. What about this part of King David's life that we're studying about now? Was he a godly person? And that's a tricky question, too. I think the answer is yes to that. But if you read on over, we know that what was the most unusual thing about Jesus Christ? The most unusual thing about Christ. That's exactly right. He never sinned. He never sinned. How are we explained to David's life? Did David ever sin? He sinned, I think we would say, repeatedly. But, and then we're going to break here. How many kings had actually been exalted in Israel now? Had David already been identified as king? That's right. So that's the point I wanted to make. We actually have a time in which there are two kings now. David has not been pulled out. He's had the songs sung about him. And please let me get loud this here, so that he's going to be king. And even Abigail, that we're going to study about in just a minute, realizes that he is going to prevail over King Saul, and they're going to move forward. But so we're actually operating with sort of two kings. David, not the exalted king, or not the king that is looked upon by all. Saul was, but that's where we're going to move from with this lesson in just a second. Now, any questions, comments about any of that, or especially about any of our sick? Yes. Point says that's why it's not included in our verses here. I think is the case, and that's a good. I really wanted to talk about that a little bit, but um, Samuel was sort of the last judge and the first, or the handoff to going to the kings, and was an older man. And actually, does he ever appear in the book again? Anybody? He does appear in the book again when David appeals to the Swami, or whatever they call that they weren't really supposed to appeal to. Samuel did appear again, but okay. Anything else, Robbie? It's good to see you. As always, it's good to see you. Who else? The hayride went off last night. I assume it left and came back. We sort of left before it really got started, but no incidents on the hayride. There's Dolores. No, yeah, that's good. That's good. Um, yes. Oh, that's interesting. And and Jimmy was saying he thought maybe Delford came back home. Well, that's good. That's really good. So I guess Delford's doing better too, and I guess Mary and Harvey are too. They've had ups and downs. My, they have. We certainly want to remember them. Yes. Yep. Yep. We have some people that are going right down there, pretty close to death here, but bounce back, and that's what we want to keep praying for, that they will, and give more time here. Okay, Joey, are you here? Yeah, there's Joey right there. And Joey's going to, if you would, say our prayer for us, or get us started in prayer, and then read the part that begins in verse 23 of 1 Samuel 25.
Let us bow. Dear most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for the blessings that you bestow upon us each and every day. Thank you for allowing us to be here to study a portion of your word. Lord, may we always look to you for guidance in our daily lives. Lord, I ask that you be with each one that's been mentioned here this morning. You know the needs more than we do, Lord, of each and every one. Lord, I just ask that you be with us throughout the whole service this morning. May we do everything in a manner that pleases you and that glorifies you. And may we always look to you for answers that we might need in this world. Most of all, I thank you for Jesus and his willingness to die on the cross for our sin. And it's in his name that I pray. Amen. Okay, 1 Samuel 25, verse 23 through 42. Now when Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. So she fell at his feet and said, On me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be, and please let your maidservant speak in your ears, and hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my lord, regard this scoundrel Nabal, for his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young man of my lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek harm for my lord, be as Nabal. And now, this present which your maidservant has brought to my lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my lord an enduring house, because my lord fights the battles of the Lord. And evil is not found in you throughout your days. Yet a man has risen to pursue you and seek your life, but the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sing out as from the pocket of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed your ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offense or hurt to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. But when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Then David said to Abigail, Blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal. So David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have heeded your voice and respected your person. Now Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was, holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king, and Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. Then it happened after about 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil. For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head. And David sent out and proposed to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David had come, Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife. Then she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, Here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. So Abigail rose in haste and rode on a donkey, attended by 5 of her maidens, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife.
Joel, thank you very much. That's a really interesting text, and we lose a little bit by not having read the first part of that chapter. That would take a whole lot of our hour here. Just a couple of things, and we'll move on to this lesson. But first of all, what about these kingdoms, so to speak? Were they as strict as our governments are today? For the most part, not. You know, you could see these farmers or ranchers probably more than farmers. They had land, and really, uh, how was their land described to them? Most of the time, what did they have? Animals or land? Animals. They had animals. That's right. And so you could read how much Nabal had here, and Abigail, how much they had, but it did, it did stir quite a feast in your mind in terms of what they had as property. Um, and I guess Nabal was not as wealthy a fellow maybe as he thought he was. But what did the author think about whether David could overcome Nabal? There was no question that he could. So King David, not even being exalted as a king, could have overcome Nabal and was actually suited up to do that, wasn't he? But Abigail got in the way, as we would say, and broke in and kept that from happening. Now, there's something else really interesting in this chapter too that I think we ought to look at just a second. So what did Abigail do when she found out that David was in the south of the country and had gathered together an army and was seeking food? What did Abigail do? She gathered up basically all she could find, it looks like, doesn't it? And she basically makes an appeal to David almost on a humanitarian from a humanitarian standpoint, so that he wouldn't do what? What was she afraid that he was going to do? I think, kill every male between where they were and where Nabal was, which wasn't going to be a good thing. So why was King David? Why did he turn out to be pleased that Abigail met him with food, and that he did not go forward and kill Nabal and his quote army? That's right. He didn't want to be responsible for shedding blood that would maybe eventually help him to be king. But he got by this, we would say, without shedding blood, which is really interesting. Now, if I get over from one lesson to the other, y'all have to help me. But so when Abigail goes back and tells Nabal, what's the first thing that happens when she goes back to explain to Nabal what happened? He was drunk, and we would say he was beyond knowing, wasn't he? He couldn't have told what was right from what was wrong necessarily, but what was his response then the following day? Yep. He could not stand the tension that came apparently with being on the downside of David. And I believe this would have been a good time not to have been on the downside of David. But then what happened? Two major things happened based on that event. Yeah, he died for whatever reason. And then the second thing that resulted from that. Yeah, which is pretty critical, that Abigail, and I think it's correct to say that Abigail responded favorably to David's request that he become wife to David. Now, we don't know a lot, and we're going to move on from this right here too. We don't know a lot about Abigail in terms of her family, what she brought to this marriage, why she would have married Nabal here, or Nabal. But she apparently had a lot of common sense and was going to be useful, certainly to David as we go forward. And before we leave this too, was so David is going to have Abigail as a wife, isn't he? Is he going to have other wives? He is going to have other wives. So we don't ever get put aside here that David somehow did like we would think the New Testament commands us to do, because he didn't. But in the Old Testament, as the author says here repeatedly, to have means was important, and for these military people to have means meant that they had multiple wives usually, and that's where he went from to become king eventually of Israel. Okay, let's look now on on page 45. I've got this one, I think, Jerry. I've got this one nailed down to, and we go kind of through this series of wives or family, especially as these kings, in this case, King Saul and then King David, developed armies to hold the nation of Israel. Just two or three things, and then we'll go right to the questions. But did the Israelites hold all of the promised land at the time David's marching around here? I think we would say not. I mean, that's a kind of a tricky question in terms of where Gath was and some of these other people. But what were some of the things they did to try to hold these nations together? Well, one of the things they would do would be marry people out of those kingdoms, or kingdoms, bad word, I think, bad word, out of these other nations or places where they had little local governments like Nobel here. So they would have wives that were kind of scattered across the scope that they looked at. What about armies? What about did they try to have strong armies? No, they absolutely did. They absolutely did. A lot of times, armies were part of the nation that they lived in. They would have families. David had these victorious people, all of them fighting to keep them king. Now, and then we'll move on here. After King David, after King David, who becomes king? Solomon becomes king. That's right. Was Solomon a good king in the beginning? Yeah, I think. What's the thing? And then we're going to go on to these questions here. But what was the thing noted about Solomon's reign over King David's reign? Yeah, he did. That's right. He didn't have the blood of victory that David had. So most of the time, his reign would have been peaceful, and really not to get it aside here, but what was the other thing that was kind of noted about Solomon's reign over Israel? The wealth of it. And I think that was we read about these nations, and a lot of times you read about the sovereign wealth of Bahrain or somewhere. Well, a lot of times that's just one guy that owns it all. I mean, that's just kind of the way they look at it. So that's sort of the way it was with Solomon, when he said Solomon the half had not yet been told about what he was worth. But David is clearing the way for that to happen. He's clearing that with the wives that he has, with the children that he has, and with the large stand-up, I would say in the end, well-equipped army. Any questions or comments about that? Yes, John. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a good point, because it brings into play all this is happening as God sees fit. And he wanted, as a matter of fact, he knew certain things were going to happen. And he knew it might be hard to get from one place to the other, but he always knew that the blood that David had used to get to the kingdom was going to keep him from reigning as the highest member of the court here, even though he became king and was I think the main thing we would say is that David was a really, really good tactical king. He knew when to go and when not to go. And then Solomon, then one night, was it easy for Solomon to become king? It wasn't easy for him to become king either. You had all these requirements, but he did become king. So let's look over on page 50. Well, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. Did everybody hear what Keith said? Did Abigail know much about David's family? You know, did Nobel, did he know much about David's family? Now, the book indicates that he didn't. You know, that he didn't know who his father was, didn't know who Jesse was, wasn't real familiar with him. But the author himself seems to think that maybe he did know more. And certainly, you know, who is somebody you would think about in our society like David? And there's not a wrong answer to that. You know, we don't have much of them even today, but you know, any of these terrorists or any of these people who come in and raise up armies and kind of raise up and go back down and then eventually become king would be like David. But so I don't know. Well, I'm sure they knew who David was, but exactly if they knew, well, what did Abigail know about David? That's a good question. That he would be king. She had seen enough to know that God was rising on him. God was rising on King David. And she was willing to make the sacrifices that would make her pleasing even to being his wife. So Abigail certainly knew enough about him to know that he was going to rise to king. Okay. Now then, page 50. Who was the mother of Amasa and Daniel, sons of David? Abigail was. Is that important? It is important. Now, did it make either one of them king? No, but it gave them a sort of a fighting chance in this battle to see who would be king. You know, and then to move on, what happened as you go through the Old Testament to the kings of Israel? Were they all good? No. Were they all bad? No. And what was one of the big, or what was one of the big turnabouts in whether they were good or bad? You know, even down to the child that was 8 years old. You know, they some would rise and some would fall, and we would say didn't even have a clue as to what they were doing. And part of that certainly was this rise and fall of patriarchy of who their father was. Yes. That's right. But we know that they didn't. And I think we also know that God knew they weren't going to either. But what did God, and that's what's been really fascinating to me about this whole study. What did God do as we go down the stream of time? That's exactly right. He intervened. He intervened when he needed to. You know, he didn't let them bend out of the road so much that the plan of salvation was lost. You know, it all. As a matter of fact, I think after we've studied the Bible as much as we have, little though it might be, I should say in my case too, as little as it might be, see, God always had His hand on the wheel. You know, He never let the thing get completely off the road, even down to the time of the Greek and Roman armies and governments.
Prophets, judges, kings, He put in place
what they needed, what they had to have, and whether it's exactly to say what they needed or not, but He kept them to where you would get to the time of Christ. Okay, what makes it unlikely that Zurich, the mother of Joah, Abishai, and Ashel, was the biological sister of Abigail? What makes that unlikely? She had to be her half sister living at the same time, so that was probably not the case biologically, even though other strange things happened. And there's really nothing that says that wasn't the case. But these were people that were certainly important to David as he moved. Which is really interesting. Uh, you know, we even get to, well, as a matter of fact, uh, what about the size of Nabal's herds and stuff? How many, I think it's, we even asked that maybe, but how many sheep did he have? 3,100 goats. 1,000 goats, I mean, yes. So you'd put him out on a hill out in Nevada or somewhere, it wouldn't have been much, but it was all relative. And these people with that amount of,
And according to the figures I came up with, in today's American money, he'd be worth north of $1.1 million.
yeah,
Just in
my
livestock.
livestock, yeah. And I don't think they took much ownership in the land, maybe some, because you got a lot of the, over in the law, you've got a lot of the dictates about how the land would be described, but it's almost like, Barry, you ever bought a piece of land that had a stump as a measuring mark? Have you ever bought a piece of land that had a tree or a stump as a measuring point? Lots of, almost all of them in Allen County before, 1960 or something would have that. But be that as it may, it was a small. Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things I would like to have always seen. I would like to have seen a 400 or 500 BC farmstead, and they probably had places where they had grapes or had facilities, meat from animals, uh, yeah, or something. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but we'll get to see someday maybe. What did Abigail do when she met David for the first time? There, yeah, and then left the food that she brought in that occasion.
Beg forgiveness on behalf of the Lord. He didn't deserve a lick of forgiveness, according to David.
That's right. But she understood and he didn't, which was important. What does the name Nabal mean in the Hebrew language? Fool. That's right. Uh, the author, but we don't know all about that, so it might have been more important than we think. Why was it important to David that God held him back from killing those in attendance at Nabal's festival? I think that there is a really good answer to this question. That's right. Shedding innocent blood in a way that would benefit him and not Nabal. And so how did God follow through with his not killing those people? He took Nabal himself, didn't he? I think that's what we would say. And maybe from just the actions that were taken there with Abigail, or not. But anyway, it all served the purpose. And this did David have a relatively good kingdom while he was king? Yeah, I think we would say he would, even though he had battles in the beginning, and there was always people to take out to solidify your kingdom. He was able to do that, and to have a kingdom that moves towards Solomon's more peaceful setting. Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, that's right, and I think that's right. Sometimes these kings will kill their whole families right down to their mother. And then other times they wouldn't, based on that. But that's right. I think they struggled, and We've all seen the old, I say Latin movies, or not Latin movies, but where you've got the kingdoms and everybody's trying to kill everybody. So David was able to run of kingdom, and I think relatively successful in doing that. Why was it important to David that God held him back during the time of killing those in attendance at Nabal's festival? What was he afraid of if he killed every male between them and Nabal? Would he have made enemies? He would have made tremendous amounts of enemies. So God, through His own purpose, was able to get around that. That's if it had. That's right. Yep. Okay, but what provisions did Abigail get together for David and his men? You may want to read that, or
7 sequins of parched grain, which is what, 35 quarts or something like that. Well, 200 cakes of figs, 2 skins of wine, 100 clusters of raisins, 5 sheep grist and ready to roast.
right? And then we're going to move on from that. But what does this phrase, or these set of phrases, make us think about being a soldier in the time of David's army? You know what they said about Dumont Hill? You know what they said about Scottsville and Dumont Hill? There wasn't a green piece left anywhere. So what they didn't use for food, they fed the horses. And that's kind of the way it was back then. You had to make sure you could feed yourself, and then have enough energy to go ahead and fight as a soldier. So that's what they were involved in doing. Okay. What happened to Nabal 10 days after the festival? Yep. The Lord took him. He went away. And that, as a matter of fact, we didn't talk about this much, but what kind of effect do you think that would have had on his whole, we would say, livestock operation?
Did he have an heir
Yeah.
to take over? Or would that have went along with Abigail?
That's what I was going to say, because Abigail left so quickly that there probably wasn't a clear inheritance to what Nabal had, but at least he didn't struggle for it anyway. I mean, he went right on, and something else became of his flocks. Okay. What happened to Abigail, his widow, Nabal's widow? She remarried, didn't she, quickly? And I think looking, we would say, to the right, looking to what she knew was going to happen as time went on and David became king. Who was the first wife of David? What's that, Michael? Anybody else have anything else? Yeah. See, I would put anybody there that we could put there except Abigail. This other lady. What's anybody else got for a name? Ahimabed, or and then he actually lost the wife, Michael, and then she came back. She was sent away and then came back, or she became another wife and then came back. But what's the point of these separate wives? Was there a point? Yeah, I think that's the main thing, is that they were looking at these alliances among other nations. And you could, you've heard of little countries, little companies buying bigger companies. They could be pretty small and buy a whole lot bigger one, and figure out how to do that stock-wise. And a lot of times what these kings did, they'd figure out how to buy another, if you will, kingdom through a wife, and move forward from there. Okay, who was the daughter of Saul who had been the wife of David? Michal was. So that's all really critical, and we're going to study some more of that as we move forward. But just a couple of things right here at the end. One, this is all the sort of the worldly life of David, getting from being the smallest child, if you will, to Jesse, to his becoming king. Now, how much do you think this David would have looked like the David who killed Goliath? A lot like or a little like? Yeah, a little like. A little like is what I would say too. I think David grew up quickly on this anointing from Samuel to be king, so that his life now extends well beyond Samuel's, and he was able to line up things it took to become king of Israel. To become king of Israel. Okay. Well, we got through 2 more lessons, such as we did. Any questions, comments?
I got a comment.
Certainly.
I really like the way the author finished up the lesson here. On page 49, I guess the last
Yeah.
sentence.
Oh, that's
The story of the Bible focuses attention on the child of Mary. Nabal and Abigail fit into that narrative. The calling of Israel, the kingdom of David, or kingship of David, and the recording of the Old Testament, all of it leads to the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the Son of God.
yeah. And I've got that underlined in my book. That's interesting. Yes, that's a place that ties all this back to the New Testament. It really ties it all back to Christ and what Christ had to do. And that's interesting. I guess we're out of time here, but was Christ in heaven watching all this happen? I don't think there's any reason to think he wasn't. I don't think, or whether he picked up his bag at night, or whatever he did. But Christ would have been aware of all this as being part of the plan of salvation, and he wanted to. That's why he prayed the different things he prayed in the New Testament, is because he knew these things were going to happen because they've been God's plan that they happen. He is. He's building housing for us today. Yeah, that's right. Okay, everybody have a good week. I hope we could hear a little better, maybe.